Soccerex connected, a very good evening. Approaching 6 o'clock GMT. Ben Jacobs with you. 2 more sessions to go. We'll focus on Soccerex heritage and the 1930 World Cup in just a moment. And then we'll have a wrap of the day as well with highlights from all of our panels. If you want to see the schedule for tomorrow, you can do so via the app or our website as well. We get underway. 11:30 GMT, day 4, Soccerex connected with Soccerex Fast Forward, a look ahead to the day, and then 12 o'clock noon is our first panel. Today is brought to you by our partners, Cell Nutrition Sport, and as a consequence of them and the overarching theme, which is analytics, performance, and medical, we've asked you a very simple question, and you've still got time to enter if you want to win the signed shirt for the day. All you have to do is become a bit of a football geek like me and tell me your favorite stat or fact, any fact from the world of football, and you will enter the draw to win a signed shirt of your choosing based on the selection that we've got here at Soccerex HQ. You can see a photograph of which shirts are available via @Soccerex. So get on Twitter, give me a football fact, use the hashtag SoccerXConnected, and we'll announce the winner on social media a little bit later and reiterate it tomorrow morning as well. Louis Saha shirt up for grabs, the away kit for Manchester United, the white one from a few seasons back. Laurie Lindsay, US Women's National Team, Deco, Carlos Alberto, and many, many more. Jean-Pierre Papin as well, a really iconic French national team shirt. So a great selection. Get involved. Give me a football fact or stat. Mac has given me one, which is that St Bart's FC were a football team of clinicians from the St Bartholomew's Hospital. He says that they were a really nice bunch of guys to play against, but they were also a little bit dirty on the field. I think that counts as a football fact. Ty Ortega has said that Arsenal now have as many Premier League red cards this season as Aubameyang has Premier League goals. It's 5 versus 5, and that one, there was actually a point where they had more red cards than Aubameyang had Premier League goals. And Utkaresh has been in touch again. He obviously wants to enter twice, double your chances. Why not? He says it's another football fact for you. Southampton's Jan Bednarek became the first ever player in Premier League history to do 3 things in one single game: score an own goal, give away a penalty, and get sent off. And he's even given me the exact timings as well. So you enter the draw too. So thanks to all of you who have engaged with us. And again, you've got about 45 minutes to get in your entries. Give me a football fact or stat to stand a chance of winning a signed shirt. We'd love to hear from you as well. If you're a fan of some of the Premier League teams in action, Burnley and Manchester City, Fulham and Leicester, both those games just got underway and they are 0-0. But let's move on to our final panel of the day now. As I already alluded to, it comes from Soccerex heritage and it's framed around the 1930 FIFA World Cup, one of the most iconic tournaments around. And in this particular session, we're going to be looking at the history of sports brands, particularly around the 1930 World Cup and the legacy that that tournament left on sports brands going forwards. We'll look at the early Dassler brothers rivalry. That's Puma versus Adidas. We'll focus on complete kit and team outfitting, and we'll discuss the evolution of products and what are today's needs in this sector. To give you a little bit more detail, we're delighted to welcome Marlon Feeney-Thompson, sportswear designer from SETTPACE. We also have the journalist and researcher Eugenio Palopoli. Alongside those two, Jean Williams is a professor at WLV, and Mariano Longo is the founder of Aeroset, and our moderator is the marketing manager at Goal. It's a very good evening to Paul Rayment. Paul, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Ben. That has actually kind of taken away my introduction. So I think considering we are down to about 45 minutes worth of time, I think I'm going to skip to some questions really, rather than kind of reiterating over what's just preceded me. The first thing we really want to get started with was obviously going back to back to the start, where we began into the 1930s, and the history of the World Cup, so the impact that the World Cup has had on the sportswear from then and sportswear which we see now. I think it's the best place to start. So, I mean, Eugenio, when we've discussed this kind of offline, you've obviously mentioned the Adidas versus Puma rivalry from '54. Would you be able to kind of go into how that changed football, how 1954 was such an important time?
Well, hi everybody. First, I think we should understand that sportswear brands were first established for a very simple and obvious reason. because at some point in the second half of the 19th century, people started practicing sports and demanded a variety of products for this practice. Well, so of course that was a consequence of industrial revolution, the extension of new upper and middle classes, availability of weekends and free time for sports, and of course the technologies that allowed new developments in shoes and apparel. And well, there were new products for new activities, but I think entering the 20th century, sport attire codes were considerably rigid, and the first articles considered for improvement and for performance improvement were the shoes. So that's why, for example, the British shoe company established by Joseph William Foster and the Dassler brothers shoe factory established in Germany after World War I were the most famous and surviving examples up until today of what a sportswear brand could be in those early days. Of course, I'm talking about Reebok and then Adidas and Puma. And well, the Dassler business became the most important sports shoe company, first in Germany, then the rest of Europe. But well, of course, sometimes it is very hard for us to understand how hard world it started and how precarious was the business in the middle of a devastated Germany. Just when the Dasslers were improving and becoming rich people, when sports in the 30s was established as an international force, and when the controversial success of Berlin 36, well, then came the horror of the Second World War and the terrible family feud that derived in the two new companies, Adidas owned by Adi Dassler and Puma owned by Rudolf Dassler. And as you said before, well, the first big hit was noticeable after Second World War in the Switzerland 54 World Cup, when Adi Dassler, acting as a special or some kind of official shoe consultant of the German national team, was perceived as a very technical man that helped to Germany recovering itself and entering the European and the world scenario once again as a respectable force, of course. And well, of course, the power of Adidas increased in the 60s, not only because sports were reaching bigger masses with new participants and spectators, but of course because Adi's son, Horst Dassler, became a driving force in international sport. His lobbying and PR abilities, the power of Adidas as a major supply allowed him a privileged position in clubs, federations, and eventually in FIFA and the International Olympic Committee. So the international sport was starting to be designed by and for Adidas. Throughout all these years, apparel was not such an important business. Football uniforms were generic, designs were neutral. The only outstanding innovations were synthetic fibers. And the only way a brand could become noticeable was its quality and endurance. Football kits were meant to endure because the clubs paid for it and federations paid for it, and they were sometimes, for many reasons, for a variety of reasons, they were not. They never thought of introducing innovations or wanting money from the big brands. Adi Dassler was never interested in textiles. His son Horst did not consider first the introduction of Adidas clothing in the 60s, but he tried an association with English brand Umbro and with French brand Le Coq Sportif. Of course, it was not easy to deal with Horst. Umbro kept some distance and could preserve their independence and their business. Le Coq Sportif did not, and they tried to compete and ended acquired by Horst. Entering the 70s, sport apparel began to matter, and there was someone who understood it better than others. But Patrick, an Englishman, owner of a small clothing company in Leicester, England, his Admiral brand introduced the concept of the first football kits as official licensed products. He started to sign a lot of English clubs, paying for the right to commercialize their kits, kits that were for the first time specially designed, and it is also very interesting that it was a woman, Lindsay Jelen, the designer, who introduced all those new kits that still are very interesting, and a lot of people are fascinated by the kind of Admiral and the style of those Admiral kits.
Eugenio, that's obviously bringing us very closely. Well, I say closely, 70s. It's not that close, I guess, to modern day now. But your work obviously goes even further back to even further before World Cups were even considered. What period do you consider to be kind of seminal in seeing sportswear or football kits, for instance, as a thing?
I would agree to some extent with some of Eugenio's comments, but could we show the Thomas Gainsborough image from the 1750s, please, which is a painting called Mr. and Mrs. Andrews, which dates from 1750. Don't know if that's available at the moment. It's not showing on my screen, but in essence, it was a young couple. I believe that's it. So this is circa 1750, and this is the birth of sportswear. The significant thing about these two young people is that they're not aristocrats. It's not Lord and Lady. It's Mr. and Mrs. Andrews. And what they effectively did, the countryside is shown off in this image as the two young people, which they effectively unified two huge estates on their marriage. And you may have seen paintings like this before in galleries that you visit, but the significant thing about this is it's not at court, it's not an indoor scene. These two very young people have chosen to be seen in their sportswear. So sports in the 1750s meant blood sports, and we can see that clearly indicated by his gun and his dog. And she is wearing a very glossy dress that appears incongruous outdoors, and it's because this is what she would have worn for her leisure. So when we talk about sport in the Industrial Revolutions, we should be thinking of going back to the 1750s as much as to the 19th century. And one of the things that I would say is significant, Paul, in answer to your question about when football kits became significant, is that football kits were like other uniforms. So if we think of what working men wore to fight as well as to work in the late 19th century, uniforms were significant. The football boots and the football uniform was part of the laws of the game that the English FA created in 1863 and had been part of earlier rules going back earlier into the 19th century. What I would say that is slightly, my interpretation of what Adidas did is slightly different than Eugenio's, is in terms of what Adidas did that was different is that they specialised in sportswear. So actually, if you go into the archives of Adidas, they have the largest collection of British Manfield football boots outside of the UK. And that's because they copied, they innovated, and British manufacturers who made boots, you can imagine the old kind of boots that we think of as British and then continental compared with Adidas, is that the British boot manufacturers were producing working men's boots that they adapted them for football wear. What Adidas did was, what the company did in the interwar period, as the sports shoe fabric Gebruder Dassler, is that they specialised in sportswear. And the other thing that I think fits into Eugenio's story is simplicity. We're talking tonight about branding. So what was really important for the Dassler brothers is that they saw that if you put football boots on the feet of teams, you could sell 11, 12, 15 pairs of shoes. But what they had also done was to clothe and to shoe the German Olympic athletes, and they had their first successes at the 1928 Olympic Games, but people couldn't tell that they were Adidas shoes. So what they did was the famous 3 stripes. And that instantly in photographs and then in the moving image, when you get into 1936 Olympic Games, the 3 stripes visually gives a clue to anybody who's looking at photographs or the moving image. These are Adidas brands, and every other brand that's gone on to subsequently think about how to identify their brand visually very quickly have used that simplicity. And so we get the Nike tick, you get the the Puma, you get the Fila brand, you get those other kind of brands that somebody can just recognize in that split second. And so I think one of the stories we're telling here is heritage branding. Sports branding has a very long heritage to deal with the weather, either hot, cold, or whatever. We're talking about specialization and innovation to further specialize, and we're dealing with simplicity, something that very quickly can be very recognizable.
Was actually Nike, who, when it comes to branding, have had probably on par with the likes of Adidas. When did they come into the scene? Because from the stories we've had so far, they seem to be rather late bloomers.
They were very late, and initially they started off. I absolutely agree with the interpretation that 1954 World Cup, with those screw-in studs, with the innovation when Dassler travelled with the German team, and they were able to screw in those studs in for the second half, turning a seeming defeat into a victory was a kind of a light bulb moment. So 54 is definitely significant, and Phil Knight and Nike begin initially. Obviously, he was a huge runner. He was not a football or soccer player. So what he initially did was to import Japanese goods and then begin to adapt them to make them more comfortable for him as he ran. And it's only when his import business is not as successful as what is happening elsewhere that they actually begin to manufacture. And then it's very much a US versus a European story, because Nike starts to buy into that kind of branding nationalism that we've very much seen with Adidas and other brands.
Speaking of branding, I'd like to just hand over to Mariano, who is a sponsor. His company is, you can see his company's branding across the front of Racing of Argentina and on the sleeves of Wolves in the Premier League at the moment. As a sponsor, what goes into the thinking process behind that? Why is your company on the front of Racing? Which is a great shirt, obviously.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me, by the way. It's a pleasure. Well, Racing Club, I'm a huge supporter of Racing Club. So as soon as I came across the opportunity to be part of the history of the team that I love, there were no doubt. We were talking, Paul, the other day that for the people to know, we trade engine parts for airlines. So honestly, we are not the typical brand that is going to go for a football shirt. But honestly, again, to be in the history of the team that I love, and of course, the exposure, because, we are a big team in Argentina. We are playing Copa Libertadores, which is something like the Champions League in Europe, start opening a lot of doors for us. And then the chance to be the first company in the business, despite the airlines, of course, because the airlines are treated differently. We are the first provider of engine parts in the history of the Premier League. So we come across the guys in Wolverhampton, and we're there, and just enjoying trying to learn. Again, the level of exposure, I think football nowadays is a major thing around the world. So enjoying, learning, and trying to give something back to, that sport that has given us so much during the past years.
Would you agree then that although your average fan isn't going to go out and buy a jet engine from you after seeing your name across the front of racing, there's more kudos that comes from being associated with a club like that in Argentina when you're dealing with your clients?
That it's a good question, because since we signed the first contract, it was with Racing Club in February last year. Every time that we're going to visit an airline, we must take a shirt with us, otherwise they won't let us in. So it's part of the business nowadays. We are lucky that we're working with airlines all around the world. So I think that Racing Club and Wolverhampton now, they have a few more supporters, and it's just great, because I think that the football is a universal language. It doesn't matter where you're from, if you're a man, if you're a woman, it doesn't matter your age. Everybody loves football. So I think that our clients can see that we did it because we loved to be there. We are not looking for revenue, because it's not a move for revenue at all. So yes, the impact was extremely positive for us.
And wasn't there a recent moment, was in the Copper Lib, where a certain moment on the pitch really helped out?
Yes,
for racing?
yes. We have a few of those moments. We were lucky. We won our derby a few months ago with 9 men, and we scored in 5 minutes before the end of the match, and that is considered one of the most celebrated goals in history of Racing Club. So imagine, and that picture will be forever there with Aeroset on the chest. So we cannot ask for anything else.
I mean, one thing that's obviously been quite different now than it would have been, I guess, right at the beginning, when we talk about the previous World Cups, is the place that football's had with fashion. Football has always been linked with fashion, not always for the best, quite a lot of times not for the best. But more recently, with, for instance, PSG's ties with Jordan and the human race kits with Adidas, that seems to be changing. It seems to be getting treated with a lot more respect. Jean, I know we've discussed collaborations, things like this as well. Is this how you see football shirts and football kits moving forward, to become more of a fashion item and treated seriously as one?
Yeah, I guess so. I would characterize the sportswear industry as much more conservative than the fashion industry. And so the fashion industry has been exploiting what it calls sports looks trend for at least 6-7 fashion seasons, as opposed to football seasons. And of course, we have seen certain icons, and I think we can all think of Cristiano Ronaldo, who are effectively trying to self-brand through their fashion choices and their purchasing choices. Actually, to give the example of Wolverhampton, one of the ways in which Wolverhampton was world leading was, of course, Wolverhampton hero Billy Wright had a more famous spouse who was a pop star way back in the 50s and 60s. So this is not necessarily a new thing. When he married one of the Beverly sisters, and she was far better known than he was, even though he's the first man in England to win 100 caps for England. So the Posh and Becks and those kinds of things are not new, but I do think it's a new moment when perhaps we are seeing, as we did at the recent presidential inauguration, when we're starting to see a combination between Dior and Air Jordans, and they're worn to, a presidential inauguration, that you can wear training shoes to something as serious as that. Whereas, I'm old enough to remember that you couldn't get in a nightclub in the 70s and 80s if you were wearing training shoes. So I think we can agree that it's not so much the football boot, which is problematic, even though we've all seen those Balenciaga £550, $550 recent football boots as items of desire, but you can't wear them in the street. You look pretty awkward. the big success story that's come out of football is something that started off as the training shoe, again, an Adidas innovation that were worn for futsal and kind of for training, but also became streetwear in the 1950s. And trainers are I would argue, the big success story of the 20th century, in the same way that jeans were the working man's clothes of the 19th century. So we all wear jeans and trainers now, even to a presidential inauguration, and that's seen as perfectly fine. So I would argue that sportswear is so influential now that probably on your wedding day, doesn't matter whether you're male or female, you or your guests are going to be wearing something that have been innovated through the changes in sportswear, just because we all like to feel a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more smart and informal, even on our most formal occasions.
Actually, Marlon, the way that you do seems to fit in perfectly with this. I mean, the kits that you produce, albeit digitally, mostly through your Instagram channel, they wouldn't have been accepted in the 1954 World Cup. I'm pretty sure they shocked most people. You really seem to kind of be able to combine what is considered to be fashion, very forward-thinking fashion, with the limited limitations of football kits. How do you see things changing? We have recently, I mean, Jean mentioned some recent examples, but I mean, Nike just recently put out their Air Max kits for Chelsea and Liverpool. Is this going to be the future? More collaborations like this, more retro kits, teams having 5 or 6 different kit launches over the course of a year?
I hope so, but just to go back a little bit, I'd like to say that like football and fashion, that's not really been a new thing. If you look back at the football casual scene, high fashion brands have been infiltrating through the casuals for years. They've been wearing Stone Island on the terraces. The Oasis and that have been wearing the Manchester City kits as like would be termed as streetwear. So this is not a new thing that's happening. And like the even the Nike PSG collaboration with Jordan, there was a kit in 2014, which is around the sort of time that I started doing this sort of high fashion versus football collaboration thing. With it was Adidas for Real Madrid in 2014 with Yohji Yamamoto, who's a designer for an off-brand of Adidas called Y3, which is a bit more of a high fashion sportswear brand. But that sort of thing, they were doing that back in 2014. So it's only recently that people are starting to pay attention with the fact that social media and all that thing, you can actually see that people are actually wearing these things as like fashion items. And what did you say about, what was the question about where do you see it going? Sorry.
Yeah, well, pretty much that. Where do you see it going? I mean, we've had, I do lose track sometimes. Traditionally, it used to be, I say traditionally, maybe about like 20, 30 years ago, is the team might release a kit every couple of years.
Yeah.
Now you have a team release a first, second, and third kit that has some fashion collaboration, like with maybe, let's say, Jordan or the Human Race stuff. And now you also see maybe a digital kit, which we release exclusively in FIFA. Are you seeing that in the future? Are we going to see more? And does that breadth of kits necessarily can it be negative toward the brand of the club? Is it harder to identify a club's colours or
we're definitely going to see more of this happening because football is now crossing over into multiple different facets. So fashion, football, gaming, entertainment, they're all going to merge together. It's all going to be just one entity as entertainment. And then releasing multiple kits for like FIFA and all that different things, they're catering to different audiences. So the home and the away kit may cater to the older audience that still likes, that wants to have the heritage of the club. And then the third and the fourth kits that we're now seeing, the digital kits and them sort of things, they're appealing to a younger audience. The Air Max kits that you mentioned earlier on, the Spurs one, who else did they have? there was
Chelsea and Liverpool.
Yeah, Chelsea and Liverpool. The Air Max kits, they're gonna be targeting an audience that is like 8 to 18 probably. I can't see anyone older than that wearing them, but you have to cater to.
I cancel my order then.
Yeah, sorry if you have ordered one. But Air Max as a brand is catered towards that sort of audience. So you have to cater. You have to cater for every age range within football. Otherwise, it's just going to die out when the older generation dies out.
This is a good question. We have had. I mean, we've gone right now from. Gene, I forget when your picture was from, but it was a long time ago, up until the present day, in the space of about half an hour. But I've just had some questions for it, sort of fitting quite well with this as well, and the issue you have when things change so quickly. So one of the questions we've had sent in has asked whether the evolution of sponsors on kits has been transformative, and with shirt sponsors now not viable for some big brands, will we ever see the likes of Leicester and Walker, Nintendo and Fiorentina? I want to see that again, or does it become too expensive to be a club sponsor? Mariano, maybe this one's for you. I mean, I don't know how much you're paying racing, but it's I presume it may have been a lot cheaper a long while ago.
Yeah, well, it's investment. You know, again, we wanted the exposure, and let me tell you, because this is interesting. When we decided to go for the sleeve sponsor of the Wolverhampton, we decided to change the color of the logo, our logo, just to match the shirt. If you check the sleeve, is kind of like gold, old gold, that's it, they call it, kind of like a yellow, and that's not Aeroset. But we thought a little bit on all this that you guys are explaining so well about the fashion. So we don't only wanted to be the sponsor, we don't only wanted the brand to be there, we wanted to merge the brand within the shirt, which I believe is beautiful. But there are not many, I mean, you guys helping, but there are not many teams in the world with that color of shirt. So that's why we decided to go in the same tone, the same yellow. But yeah, you know, every single deal is something has to be worked out, and it's an investment. Yeah, of course, it's not cheap. You know, that's why they don't allow you to tell how much you pay for these things. But it's part of the game. You know, it's exposure. Again, you need to understand that. I remember, Paul, I think I told you the day after we started sponsoring the sleeve of Wolverhampton, I got calls even from teams in the F1, Formula One, you know, which it looks like it's completely different to football. We received calls from a team in the West, American football, which is, you know, I'm from Argentina. I've never played American football in my life. I like it, but it's not me. And again, it's exposure, and I think you're paying for it.
Another question we had come in, which is quite timely, I guess, as well. And this one could really be for everybody. It was targeted for Marlon, really. And I think we've kind of answered it slightly already. Some said the last couple of years have been a fantastic year for kits. They mentioned Ajax away, which I'm going to take credit for. Okay. Being a particularly great kit and one that's got a lot of attention for being one that seems to have been designed to be worn fashionably, not necessarily so much on the pitch, although clearly they do. Are we expecting that to be more of a focus in the future, with kits being designed for the street rather than from the football pitch? And while we're talking about great kits, what's everyone's favourite kit? So everyone could pick one, whether it's a World Cup or a club kit. Marlon, I'll let you kick off.
So street football and streetwear is definitely going to be a thing that's going to stay around, and I think we're seeing it now more often. Like, referring back to those Air Max kits that I was talking about earlier on, that they are more fashion focused, and they're going to be more fashion focused. Football kits are getting more expensive, so they need to cater for just the sport and being able to wear them somewhere else for the fans to want to invest that amount of money into a kit. Going to my favorite kit of recent is going to be the Nigeria kit 2018, because that is one of the kits, talking about the streetwear sort of side of things, that is one of the kits that made big waves within the streetwear and the fashion industry. I mean, it sold out within minutes, and it set a record for the most pre-sales It had, I think, 3 million pre-sales for Nike. So yeah, it was crazy, and it was even reselling on fashion reselling websites such as like StockX and Go and Grail and them sort of places for more than retail. I mean, it's not good for the game, but it's good for the exposure of the teams. I mean, who was really interested in what Nigeria was doing if you weren't Nigerian in the World Cup? But then everyone that year was supporting Nigeria. They wanted Nigeria to win because the kit was so good.
Gene, how about yourself? Is there, or maybe if there's a kit which you like, maybe both aesthetically and one that you think was seminal, the kit that made the most impact in football?
Yeah, well, for me, it's the story behind the redesign of the Brazil kit. You know, they famously didn't win the World Cup when they thought they were going to on home soil, and there was an open competition to redesign the kit. And so for me, that kind of iconic redesign of that, and when they came good, so it was a very brief collaboration with Athleta and Adidas in the 1970s, with the 3 green stripes down the sleeves, which I would argue is an iconic kit. And just wanted to pick up on a point that Marlon made, which is just want to highlight some of the work that's now been done within museums to actually collect, to turn what we would think of as kind of sportswear into contemporary collections. So there is a wonderful collection now, a national collection at Northampton museums, and it's all based on trainers and sporting footwear. And those kinds of things are being collected, not just for fans like ourselves to talk about within our generations, but people in 100 and 200 years will be talking about the development of sportswear and what's happening now. So we can start to see almost footwear reaching the same level as, you know, art and different aspects of culture. And of course, those of us who are fans know that that should have happened 50, 60, 70 years ago, but at least it's happening now.
Good answer. Eugenio, same question to you. What kit's made the biggest impact, or one that you just like to wear?
Oh, okay.
We have a muting situation.
Okay. Well, I think that your favorite shirts will always depend on when you started watching football and football kits. For me, it was, well, since a very young kid, I started watching football, and the first kits that were something completely different from what I was accustomed to were in Spain, 82, those Admiral kits of Belgium and England. They were something completely different. As I said previously, they were specifically designed with a concept that I think other brands were still missing. Of course, in the following World Cups, the business growth, and everything was about getting the best kits, the best technologies, new textiles, and all those innovations. And nowadays, I think that for me, it's very impressive what Nike has done with the Vapor Knit and Aerofly and all those crazy names for their new fabrics. But I think that they take design in some kind of 3D concept. I think they learned how to maintain a design concept through all the years, and going for slightly modifications that that do not alienate football fans. And well, yeah, as Marlon said before, Nigeria kits are impressive, but so are Holland kits. England kits for me are always something special, and the new blue away kit is something incredible. And yeah, sure. Nowadays we got this the separate boundaries between performance and fashion. And I think that's because football fans are quite conservative when it comes to the first home kit, and maybe they'll accept something different for a second or third. But because of esports and because of the retro kits, now every season we got not only 3 but 4, a 4th kit, a special kit, a carnival kit, a esports kit. So that's a lot of kits, and well, I think the sports brands were quite intelligent to generate and perceive those different needs, and to come with a product for each need.
Thank you. Mariano, I'm going to ask you your favorite kit. You're just going to say racing, aren't you?
I have two. I have the away kit of Racing Club, which is all black with gold, which is beautiful. You know, we have never played with black. That's one of my favorite. And the third kit of Portugal, Wolverhampton, which imitates the Portuguese kit, which is that maroon, which is absolutely beautiful. So those are my 2 favorites, and I think it's because it takes away. I'm with Eugenio now that I'm more involved in the design of the shirts. The fans, we don't really like playing around with the main kit. You know, you cannot go on Racing Club and say, okay, it's going to be black. No, it was always going to be white and light blue, and it's going to be always like that. But I think that the second kit and the third kit is always give you room for something crazy, you know? And crazy is nice, and football is nice. So yes, those are my 2 favorites, but there are many beautiful kits all around the world.
Thank you. We are running out of time slightly, so I just want to give some room for this other question I've had through, which is a very good point, and anyone's welcome to join in, but I think, Gene, this might kind of play into your specialities here. The question reads, basketball has been probably one of the best success stories when it comes to personal branded shoes, such as Jordans, LeBrons, etc. Why hasn't this crossed over to football so much? Why don't we have personally branded boots attached to specific stars?
Well, we've always had branded boots right back to the 1930s. So the great Arsenal squad of the 1930s definitely had their branded boots. George Best had side lace kangaroo skin in the 1970s. So that we've always had that. But the problem is, of course, cleats or studs or whatever you want to call them, they just don't morph into streetwear in the same way that basketball shoes did. And although you have music crossovers, you know, thinking of like Run DMC with My Adidas, and kind of in a way, those kind of brands starting to co-opt black culture, and particularly urban culture, going back to the 1980s with hip hop, when that was quite a risky thing for Adidas to do, and very kind of un-Adidas in lots of ways. Then actually, because Nike chose to make the Jordans all about him. He wasn't one of many people who signed to Adidas. It was all about him. It was his own brand, and it could take off in a particular direction. It just happened at the same time when you started to get a lot of black music producers moving into owning their own products and owning their own production values. So that fit very well with the wider incorporation of black culture into popular culture. And the Air Jordans absolutely epitomise that. So, you know, if you were watching on Netflix, as I'm sure we all were, you could see the way in which Jordan became a co-producer, which when he was playing basketball, he had to be picked for the team. And of course, the Chicago Bulls were brought to what a lot of people would argue a premature end for that great squad. What he could control were the Air Jordans and the production of that. And I would argue that that made him bigger than the basketball. And so we've yet really to see that within football to the same extent. Although obviously with predators, I would argue that the footballers have had a huge impact on the design of football boots more recently.
Would there be, we just probably squeeze this last minute, has there been an instance where brands have been influenced by fan participation, where fans have made a difference to what's been coming out the other end?
Yeah.
You're nodding, Gene. What have you got?
I'll take that one.
Marlon,
yeah,
sorry.
there's always teams putting up design competitions, design this kit, design our away kit, design our third kit, and then the fans vote for who's the best kit. So I think that's going to happen more and more often, to get the fans involved more in what actually happens, because then no one can say that I hate that kit because a fan actually designed it. The fan knows more about the club than anyone, rightly. So if they've designed it, then no one can really have too many complaints about that.
So as far as kits go, you've also designed kits, Marlon, for FIFA.
Yeah.
Bit of kit in there. Is it easier? Did you get when you did that? Did you have a completely blank slate for what you could create because there were so few kind of preconceptions?
That one was fine, because that was the first year I did it was fine because it was my own collection. So it was a SETTPACE collection based on the sort of stuff I do for my Instagram account and for just general brands in general. So it's what FIFA wanted to collaborate with me and wanted me to do what I do usually. So I did a bit. I made wacky kits that the fans would want, hopefully, and they went down a storm. So it was good.
And the last one was a PlayStation specific one you did.
Yeah, that was a bit more different. That was a corporate one, so it has to stay within the corporate brand colors and all that sort of stuff. But I still enjoyed making that one. It was good.
So who would you design for then? Given a chance that if you could remake anyone's kit.
PSG is always my favorite to make concepts for. I love the logo. It's very simple. And the sponsor, even though the sponsor changed, I preferred it when it was Fly Emirates. Fly Emirates sits on a kit very nicely. But now that it's changed, it still sits good. And credit to any sponsor. I'm talking directly to Mario there, like saying that you were happy to change your brand colors to fit with the kit, because that as a designer is horrible when the sponsor does not want to change and you're
Yes.
trying to make the kit look nice, but there's only so much you can do if the logo for first doesn't look good and the color palette is not fitting with the actual kit. So credit to you for that.
A very good answer. We are kind of running out of time, unfortunately, so we are going to have to go back very soon. So I just want to say thank you to everyone today for your time, for your input, for your expertise, for looking at the past and looking at the future. It's been an eventful day, so hopefully everyone will still be able to stay and join us for the rest of Soccerex over the next couple of days. And let me say thank you and back to the studio.